Here we go. Okay, so thank you so much for the invitation to come. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you to the Danish Embassy. Thank you also to Mr. Hu, who's actually read the books. I invite you to come to Copenhagen to get them signed. So it's lovely to be here. Also a wonderful space. So thank you for coming, everyone. And now you almost saw the presentation, but I'll try to run it again. So I'm from Gehl Architects in Copenhagen. We are also located in San Francisco and New York. We're urban designers by nature, but also social scientists. So that means that we're quite interested in the combination between life and form. So how to understand public life, what's going on in the cities, and how we actually design for that life, and how we get smarter around what actually works in terms of design and what doesn't. And so part Jan has never been a ferocious writer, as you say, but he's written a few books that have been translated to numerous languages. And so that has also led the company to work or the practice to work in different locations around the world. That was before we counted carbon too much, but we have been in quite a number of places, books translated into more than 50 languages. And so this whole message around cities for people, life between buildings, how can we get smarter around how we plan our cities and how we build our spaces, has really kind of caught on. So one of the key principles of Gehl is that we start with life first. So how do we understand the life that's possible or that's already going on in a particular place? How do we measure it? How do we look at who's there? Then we look at what are the spaces that cater for the public life, and in the end, what are the buildings that build the spaces? So that means it's life space buildings and not the other way around. So often when we look at developments in different parts of the world, it starts with buildings that create spaces that maybe caters well or poorly for public life. For part of the office is very much this around capturing data on people in cities and what people are doing, and understanding how different environments invite people to spend time, and other environments totally not invite people to spend time. We're also interested in who's spending time. So are we catering for the elderly? Are we catering for the kids? Do we only see men, or do we also see women? So who is there? What are they doing? Is it just the stuff that we have to do, so very necessary activities, or are we also recreating or doing social stuff with friends? So yeah, capturing data on life is important. Another favorite item of ours is streets. So have done a lot of work in streets over the world. And what we found is that typically in all cities, open space is around 20% is parks, but 80% is streets. So streets is a real resource in terms of space in cities, and streets is where we can gain a lot of space for green transition, for water treatment, for fixing the energy, for more optimized transport and other stuff. So looking at streets and what we can achieve has been a project from the office for many years, and we've done that at different scales in different settings, always working very closely with people locally, either with local governments or local collaborators, or both. So starting at the policy level or the top level, that's where you can achieve a lot of change if you can set it out right from the beginning. So in Shanghai, we've developed together with the Shanghai local government street design guidelines. It's kind of like a recipe book or cookbook of how do you do good streets? How do you figure out what are the different typologies of streets, small local retail streets, bigger traffic arteries? What are the ingredients for how to achieve better streets for all? So better streets for different types of users. So at that policy level, once we get the recipe right, it's easier to cook it afterwards or to get, better environments. That was Shanghai. New York, the Americans are more impatient. Things have to go a bit faster. So So in New York, we worked with the city government under Bloomberg, and that was part of with Department of Transportation of looking at streets in New York, and in particular Broadway that came through all of Manhattan, and asking, could Times Square really also be a square? So part of what we did there was looking at, again, back to the public life. We looked at how much is available. How much is available for pedestrians? 10%. How much is available for cars? Who are the users? We had 90% of the users on foot, 10% in cars. So there was a very strong discrepancy between the allocation of space for the types of users. So part of what we did here was then to, if we're back one, was to take Broadway out and actually do a square in Times Square, but that was done as a temporary measure. So the thinking was it might not work, maybe people won't use it. And also there was a real fear around choking traffic in Manhattan. So part of this was a 7-month trial and a test afterwards in terms of a vote, whether people would want to go back or keep it as it is. And that, yeah, it stayed. Along Broadway, there were other places as well. So this is Herald Square, others as well. And again, this kind of fear that spaces wouldn't be used was quite, dropped over as there was so many people coming out. And actually part of the questions afterwards were around how to increase the quality of the open spaces available. They could only be done with paint and movable furniture and chairs because it was supposed to go out if this didn't work. So part of this was then offered by the business improvement districts, so paying for the planters and the furniture and whatever, and they lose 10% during the year, which doesn't seem to be much compared with 150,000 people using it every day. So this was done as a test by a mayor who wanted change. He was up for re-election. It's always a good time of year to do something visible. And then coming back to the data part of also measuring and looking at what did it actually mean? So how can we, by testing new configurations out of streets or places, what does it actually mean? What's the impact on a number of different parameters? It's great if it's look good. It's even better if it operates better. So looking at, this was an important point, improving travel time for vehicular traffic in the avenues by taking Broadway out. It also had more pedestrians. It had, very importantly, a significant reduction in traffic accidents related to less pedestrians in the roadway, more increased stationary activities, and an increase in property value, because this was now a space that could be used, but also a space that people really recognized. Other places have been in Brighton, UK, which was about looking at the theatre district and a quite overlooked destination in the city, where a lot of people came to watch the shows, the performance arts, and also a street that wasn't very important for vehicular use or for car usage. So what was done here was to actually do a shared space, so you can still drive a car through very slowly, and you can cycle through, but you can also spend time, and there's way more walking. So this was not done as a test, but as a permanent, and as this kind of, how do we create more spaces in the city that celebrates also the public park at the back, and also the theater district, and create more opportunities for people to spend time in the city. Yep. And so closer to here, Sydney, where we've been doing work for almost 20 years. So in Sydney, it's been part of a bigger strategy for the city centre of looking at a green, sustainable Sydney in 2030. So part of a big vision exercise of looking at how the city centre could develop. Also a very strong engagement with the local residents and stakeholders in the area to listen what is needed here, and a very big push for sustainability. So lots of bigger events at Town Hall and other places talking about urban quality. What does it mean? What do we have to do? And a core recommendation coming out of that was one spine, 3 squares. So that was George Street as the main street through the city, to free that up for traffic and create a pedestrian boulevard through the city with a very high walking quality, but also a place where you could stop walking, start to spend time and enjoy being in the city. Yeah, so we're back in the 70s. Cars were slightly prettier at that time. It stayed on. This is from the 2010s of gradually just being a traffic sewage through the city with lots of buses, lots of cars and taxis moving through and not really celebrating the heritage buildings in the background. And then this is Jan trying to push traffic out of the city. But also us at that time collecting information. We did a benchmark study on the street of looking at how is the street actually performing, how are we doing for air quality, how are we doing for noise, what's the property values, how many people are using the streets, what's the amount of greenery. So collecting a number of different data points that we are comparing now in 2024 to figure out what's going on. Because part of this, it was a very long journey. It took 20 years. So a very long journey of pushing for improvements in George Street. It's a 2.5 kilometer corridor, and pushing for a more efficient public transport system through a tram that went through this out from a university to the city center and past Town Hall and through the main street. So this is it now, of having the street freed up from traffic, having a pedestrian boulevard 2.5 kilometers, so pedestrianized with a light rail in it, which has made a huge impact in the city and has just also changed the traffic behavior of how people navigate and walk in the city. So this is it before. Favorite, you should even hear it. It sort of sounds like Hanoi on the left-hand side. But anyway, yeah, this is the past also from some of the heritage buildings and how improving or increasing the greenery, providing better space has also really helped to celebrate the heritage buildings. Then this about pedestrian behavior. This is 75, how you would cross the street as a peloton of people gathering up to be more visible. And then this is changing into you cross as you can. And with this building being taken down now to allow for a metro building to come in. Yeah. So quite a significant change in the city of taking out one of the streets. It's not killed the city off at all. Traffic is still functioning, but it's also it's offering more pedestrian space, but it's also increased investments in public transport to allow more people to move in a different way. And so this is just very different. It used to be a city that closed down at 5 p.m. every day and people would go home. Now it's open at night. There's a nighttime economy. It's good for the economy of the city. It's good for businesses that it's operating more 24 hours, and it's spread to places around the street as well. So it helped. In Denmark, we would say it's a snowplow for other investments of just clearing the way or offering new opportunities for others to invest. And so this is what we're repeating this year. We'll be looking at all these different parameters and seeing, so how was the street 2014 when we collected it last, and how is it performing now? So how do we justify the public spend of putting the money into public transport, putting the money into upgrading the street? Is it worthwhile? What does it mean for health? What does it mean for biodiversity and all these other items? Yeah, and that's it. So elsewhere in Australia, we're doing a Green Line in Melbourne, which is connecting 4 kilometers of underutilized riverfront along the Yarra River. So that is interesting project of taking complicated ownerships of spread across different private and different government bodies, and of stitching it together to provide an improved experience of the Yarra River, but also to start to take control more of the Yarra River as a water body through the city and as a big connection. And part of what we were doing there was then also looking at how do we connect it properly back with the city fabric, and how do we look at all the streets connected to it and make more out of the investments that we're making along the river. I might skip this. Yeah, so back in Copenhagen, this is another project we're working on. This is Vesterbrogade, which is the stretch of street between the town hall square and the central station. If anyone knows Copenhagen, you're more than welcome to visit. But this is a project that we've been doing with the Tivoli Gardens, which is a big amusement garden in here. So part of the idea here was to say, do we need all streets to serve the same purpose? Or can we treat the space in different ways and offer more green space in densely populated areas, but also start to deal with the water underground, which was mentioned earlier. So how do we also acknowledge that it's raining way more? We got way more water to deal with, and we need more places to put it, to store it on the ground, but also to allow it to slow it down when it comes. So this is on the drawing board. Hopefully this will happen. It's got political support and the funding. I think it will be one of the first projects that's primarily privately funded, which is not super typical in Copenhagen at the moment. Another smaller project in the city, just to remind ourselves that sometimes it doesn't have to be massively big, has been just a street corner, and working with the property owner of this building to close a small little street, take out free parking spots, and do a local square. And I think it's interesting with this project, has offered a square also in a part of the city where there's not a lot of space available. And you are reminded that as humans, we are quite small and we don't need a lot of space to actually have a place to rest or a place to start doing something else. So this is about looking for opportunities where we can and stitching up different networks of open space that can create a different experience. This was also the case in London, so working with Grosvenor, which was about, again, looking at their street networks and their open space networks and figuring out how it overlays both with the blue, this should have been green infrastructure, so how to increase the tree canopy coverage and how to deal with the blue infrastructure and cloudburst in that part of the city. Yeah. So you're getting the whole buffet of different types of projects, and you can always look it up on their website. There's way more there. So the Stockholm Meatpacking District is old industrial. So it's a brownfield development that has a big stadium to it in the corner here, and a big performance arts arena over here. So people in Stockholm knows it for various events. But it's been, with the industrial past, it's been a quite overlooked area for decades. But this is changing, and part of what we've been doing in that area has been, how do we understand the life flows in the areas before we start talking about square meters? So how do we understand what can possibly happen? What is the life that can potentially take place in the area? What are the different links and destinations? And how do we look at the ground floor landscape? So the connections between the outdoors and the indoors of buildings in a smart way. So we understand where people are moving in and out, how it all connects, and what we need to provide in the buildings going into a particular area to make the area function. So it's part of a Lego game of where you put different spots in to try to make it click and make it work. And if certain spots don't work, then other spots have to work harder. Yeah. So this also has, like the Singapore example, quite an extensive plan for also what goes on both at the street level, but also on the roofscapes. So in terms of acknowledging how much green can we possibly squeeze in to make the sustainability work harder. Then a German lesson, I will make it very short. So elsewhere in Germany, this is from Munich, we've done 2 different pieces of work with them, which has been about, that's the city government or the city of Munich, have been about both studying the life, so what is going on in the public spaces, the quality of the public spaces, but also the public life in the city. That has been leading up to a traffic plan for the city of Munich, which has been about how do we change the traffic management of the city based on what we learned with the usage of the different spaces. So this has been looking at all the open spaces in the city. It's been gathering and analyzing quite extensive data sets around both from interviews and from focus groups, from walking tours, from countings and observations of what's going on in the city and what's not going on, and also different opinions about how the city is used. And then based on that, it's been possible also to develop different kind of typical user profiles and also understanding what are the typical needs of the different groups of people. So what do they require of the public spaces in the city and what are they missing? What are the areas also with too little open space or what types of open space do we need more of? This is about the types of usage in public space and what's most popular. And it's also looking at the density of use. So what are some of the places that are almost overused and where the open spaces struggle to cater for the amount of people in the area that want to use it. So part of this whole study was about recognizing that Munich is growing, the population is growing, there will be way more people, the public spaces are already struggling. So how do we increase the amount of public space in the city and where should it be located? But also how do we make these spaces available, perform better to deal with the pressure? And that led into planning, looking at what if we look at the open space? What if we look at the green structure? What if we look at mobility? So how do we look at all the different layers as part of a bigger commission and put them together instead of letting one department look after traffic, one department look after trees, one after public space, someone else after people? But how do we think all of it together so that we make sure that the different plans inform each other and that we make decisions or informed decisions about a number of different themes at the same time? Coming almost to an end. So yeah, back in Copenhagen, this is kind of, you could say, where the Germans are structured and organized. The Danes, a little bit more messy, but the Danes, this has been way more organic in Copenhagen. So Copenhagen has spent the last 60 years of gradually improving the city center of the city. There's never been a master plan. There's never been a specific, policy or structure around it. It's been quite organic and it's been by opportunity based. So when there was opportunity has been taken, and gradually, it has increased a whole network of open space of different qualities, of different characters for different types of people, of just growing the office in the city over time. So that has led to, again, some of what we saw also in Sydney of creating more mixed streets with different types of users. This would be difficult in Hanoi, I think, just from walking here yesterday, slightly difficult. So, and it was in Copenhagen in the past. Gradually changing the paradigm, gradually addressing how we use open space and for what. These guys are underground now. On a space that's also catering for the local schools and is offering just more space for the kids in the area in general. This is the waterfront. Used to be parking. Now, with cafes, people spending time. So clearing up along the waterfront. Also looking at Town Hall Square, and this is changing again. So this used to be, I was a student, this was super tricky to cycle through. So we're bicyclists, yeah. So this used to be super tricky of actually getting across here. This is now one big, whoopsie, this is now one big, now I'm doing it again. Yeah, I'm doing it again. So yeah, so this used to be one big space. Now this one is being closed as well, so that the space actually connects with the buildings at the end. So this kind of Copenhagen is the story about constant improvements, not massively big aspirations or ambitions or ideas, but just constantly improving on a number of different parameters and on a number of different places in the city, and it all drives in the same direction. Part of what Gehl has been doing has been collecting the data and information about how the city is used. So part of this has been the documentation around saying, we don't just think or guess how the city is used, we actually know it because we've got the data to inform us. And that's helped this kind of political steadiness or firmness around, yes, this is a great idea. We can see that it actually works. So it's cleaning up the streets, still traffic there, but cleaning up a lot of the streets. It's improving and opening up school playgrounds also for the public to use them over the weekend and in the evening. It's looking at the rooftops and of greening measures. It's also looking at health. So part of we do too much of what you're doing now, that we sit down and we're not active enough. So we need to figure out how the city can also help us to get more active by walking, bicycling, going to this to the exercise roof where you can just do a big small swing during your lunch break. Also very strong on cycling. If you haven't been to Copenhagen, come and we'll put you on a bike and you won't get off before you take off. So lots of infrastructure now for bicyclists around the cities. So 50% of all tours or trips in the city is made on bicycles. Not mopeds, but bicycles. So you have to use a slight energy, which is good for you, good for the planet, good for the city. So some of the numbers here say that, 62% of Copenhageners bicycle to work and to their education. The commercials in the shop windows talk about how many bicyclists and pedestrians will come by the shop. And also we know that the total health effect of having people on bikes is quite significant. So I would say in Copenhagen, we're not talking about investments in bicycles, but we're talking about saving costs on other measures, on health particular, but also on more expensive infrastructure for cars. That one important too, impossible to read. It's just saying people who bicycle to work, so half an hour a day, or physically active half an hour a day, live or have 30% lower mortality. So we live longer. In Denmark, super important. The longer we live, the more tax. Very heavily taxed country, but it's also good for you. And of course, we start them early. So this is kindergarten. You learn how to bike, off you go. And when you start school, you can cycle to school, you can cycle to French, you can cycle to sport, because there's an infrastructure laid out for you that enables you to do that. And as a parent, you can stay confident that you know this can happen. And then the important message, I think, is here. It didn't used to be like that at all. So when I was a kid, not at all. So that has changed over the years, and it's been this constant investment. Am I running out of time? 2 minutes? 2 minutes, okay. Yeah, so this is the last one, also from Copenhagen. It's about air quality that was mentioned earlier. So we did a project with Google that do the Street View recordings. and Utrecht University in the Netherlands, and the Copenhagen Solutions Lab, which is on the city of Copenhagen. So we had air quality measurement equipment in the Google Street View cars in a certain part of Copenhagen, of recording the different particles in specific areas to be more knowledgeable about what's the actual air quality situation. Our contribution was to look at particularly small children. So we worked with the Bernard van Leer Foundation, which is a foundation that supports studies in small kids, particularly from 3 and down. So smaller kids and how they thrive or don't thrive in urban environments. And so part of that, of what we looked at, was then to figure out how do we combine the data sets on where the small kids spend time with the air quality. And so what are the findings? And some of what we know is that kids' brains develops, 90% of it is developed before we're 5 years old. So that's the sad news. We're not going to get way more. So, but also we breathe 4 times faster when we're kids. And so we take up way more polluted air the smaller we are. So the effect is just harder. And obviously we are at the perfect location in terms of where the fumes come out from cars and stuff to absorb even more. So part of this was then looking at what are the routes that people take, what are the walking patterns in different areas, what are the different destinations, and what is then the air quality overlay, and where the problems. We had kids equipped with webcams. Also, what's the kid experience of being 3 years old and walking with your mom in the city, and experience a very different setting than I think we do. So part of this was looking at in this specific living area that has a high density of families with small children, what are some of the areas based on the air quality data where we should try to, with the dark green, invite or make more inviting connections, as here the air quality is actually lower. So they can be better places for spending more time. They can be better places for taking the tours. So how do we make sure that those connections are inviting and easy to take? But also how there's certain, this is Istergade, so there are certain streets that you can't avoid. So how do we also make sure that we reduce the exposure to poor air quality in some of those areas? And you can say the easy response is to take the cars out, not possible in all places. Yeah, so this is the street before, where there was a problem with the parked cars and of cars coming in and out, and a lot of fumes related to that. Also, the moms on maternity leave with the pram in perfect, location for getting more fumes. And so part of what we're looking at is what are the instant improvements you can do as a pilot project of testing out a better configuration while we wait for a different traffic regime in the street. And part of that was very much about added greenery, pushing some of the parking away or taking some of the parking out for certain stretches of the street. And in that way, extending the distance to traffic. And in general, putting more green in, more trees, more low-scape greenery to allow for a better quality. And then this is the last one. So I would just say, based on that work with the streets, it's not just about a pretty street. So that it's great if it's pretty too. But streets can cater a lot for public health, getting us more active, cater a lot for biodiversity, climate action, social inclusion, benefit the economy. So we should, be very careful around streets as resources, as they are a real key to many of these different factors. So with those words, thank you very much.